Hello, I'm Tricia Patterson, and I'm going to talk about my residency at MIT Libraries today and how it's gone so far. As you either already knew or guessed from the title slide, my project has revolved around some music materials. I'm working under digital curation and preservation, but embedded within the Lewis Music Library, which received funding to digitize some audio content from the Herb Pomeroy collection. Herb Pomeroy was an influential jazz musician and educator in the area who was also involved with MIT for some time. Since there's been increased attention to enhancing their digital content management program, it was a fortuitous time to use this project as a way to map out the digital preservation workflows. So as this audio content moves through the high-level workflow, my role is to run a gap analysis on the lower-level workflow, developing detailed workflow documentation as we go. I'm documenting a general workflow and calling out a use case for digital audio. Use this content to test and enhance the workflow. Contribute to a work group compiling a premise profile for digital content preservation. Contribute to another work group that's evaluating access platforms for streaming digital audio content. And overall, sort of stay abreast of developments in the digital audio preservation arena, making recommendations for metadata, quality control tools, new ideas, etc. when I can. So I want to review some of what I've accomplished so far here at my halfway point. I'll start with where we are with the gap analysis of the workflow. Some of you have already seen this, some of you haven't. And this is the high-level content lifecycle management workflow that was developed and designed prior to my arrival through a collaboration between Curation and Preservation Services and the Institute Archives and Special Collections. You can see it covers physical analog content, the transition of analog to digital content, and then digital content. My work is focused on the last two sequences of this pipeline, from digitization through managing digital content. I'm working with people throughout a few departments and roles, interviewing, going to meetings, etc., to document the lower-level workflow for each of these bubbles or stages. At the end of December, I finished designing the diagrammatic and narrative documentation for the entire sequence, transform physical analog to digital. So I'm going to walk through the workflow diagrams I designed and show you a little what the narrative segment looks like at the end. So you can see up here in the isolated second sequence of the pipeline from the high-level diagram, and this is below is the detailed lower-level workflow. I've retained the conventions established in the high-level diagram, so in each piece of the documentation you can see which stage feeds into the current stage, the actions that occur, often with a sequence in mind, decision loops that are made, and specific outputs or documentation that feed into subsequent stages. We begin with the decision to digitize and what discussion or decisions that entails. Next, we define digitization requirements. We prepare the physical content for digitization, whether this will occur internally or through an external vendor. And you can see we call out like when notification needs to be sent or documentation needs to happen. This handshake 1, is the physical exchange of the materials from the content curators to collections preservation and reformatting. For archival material, it was really important that this be acknowledged as a significant moment because we're physically letting go of unique archival materials and entrusting them elsewhere. To ensure the chain of custody could be trusted and that we knew where the materials were at all times, an audit database was designed to list the custodian at any given time, the place, the dates of transfer, etc. And this is a really good example of the kind of tools that emerged after we were documenting lower level workflow stuff. That were necessary to sort of ensure the security of the materials. Then CPRS packs and sends out the materials for digitization. This was a larger stage that included its own internal handshake between collections, preservation, and reformatting and the vendor and back again. So we have a slightly lower level diagram that's fleshed out further into these three parts. Once collections, preservation, and reformatting has the physical copies back along with their digital surrogates, the digital content moves into the third sequence of the pipeline, which I'm currently documenting now and you don't see right here, and the physical items are prepped and returned to the content curators, which is A5 here. Another handshake from collections, preservation, and reformatting back to content curators, and finally the decision to keep or toss materials now that they have been digitized. This is what the narrative segment looks like. This one in particular is for A2, defined digitization requirements. I focused on the diagrams because I didn't want to bore you with a bunch of text, but you can see we summarize each stage to orient anyone using the workflow, outline stakeholders that act in each stage, inputs from previous stages that inform the actions in the current one. We list the actions, their outputs. On subsequent pages, there are also notes, tools required in this stage, references, and use cases. So it's pretty extensive. This isn't a music picture. This is just a rad photo from Point Break. Good movie. It's a good handshake picture. Because as I mentioned earlier, another project that takes up a lot of my time is the audio streaming platform evaluation. So the team compiled for this evaluation that I'm working on was purposefully designed to be an organizational and technological collaboration. So we have Nancy McGovern and I currently under digital curation and preservation, Kate Gallivan and Mickey McDonald representing content curators, and Mickey McDonald also does the metadata, and 3 IT people, Richard Rogers, Solzende, and Helen Bailey, who is a data curation analyst and a bridge between IT and libraries because she's developed a good background in both. We began as the Avalon evaluation team, Avalon being an open source media streaming system, and we decided we wanted to broaden the evaluation to include other systems. That way, even if we end up using Avalon, we can elaborate on why we made that choice and not another one. We've compiled a pretty hardy list of requirements. Not all of them are pictured here. This is about half to a third of them. Considerations include user interface, search and discovery, accessibility, ingest and export functions, metadata, permissions, and more. Integrating track compliance, or trustworthy repositories audit certification compliance, has been a really big priority as well, as we're trying to ensure as new systems are implemented, we can begin populating our own track instance that documents our progression as a trusted digital repository. As a team, we've discussed and ranked each of these requirements, and now we're narrowing down some of our initial options in order to measure a few against the requirements. I know a couple of years ago, the Lewis Music Library looked into a streaming option for their content, and it didn't pad out at the time. So this is an exciting facet of my work, trying to make sure there is headway this time and that they get what they want and need. So while those are 2 projects that have taken up the majority of my time, I've also made progress on other things, some of which include a digital audio scan, where, as I mentioned earlier, I keep an eye out on new projects and technologies, update our wiki, make recommendations if they apply. I just joined Helen Bailey and Mickey McDonald on the premise profile team, which has been a good opportunity to really become familiar with that standard. And earlier on, I worked on composing a workflow literature review, which was trying to place what we're doing with workflow development into the greater conversation and see what could be applicable to our work from other fields. So far, the residency has trotted on really smoothly for the most part. Halfway through, I feel much more oriented and independent. I feel really comfortable with everyone I work with. A lot of that is due to collaboration. It's a big benefit of collaboration. I'm on a lot of teams in groups and subgroups. Group work means you have a lot more buy-in into programs and projects you implement. You get to build strong relationships with your coworkers. You gain added expertise from all the different hands on deck along the way. But it can also be really challenging. You want everyone to feel heard, but most of the time everyone has a lot to say about this thing that they're passionate about, and at some point you have to move forward regardless. So having most of my work based on collaborative environments has meant I had to learn to navigate when work slows down because so many hands are stirring the pot, or it's difficult to schedule meetings because there are 17 members and they all need to be there and we all have conflicting schedules. So that's been a real good learning opportunity when it comes to balancing that. As I move into the second half of the residency, there's still a good lot left to accomplish. This is the workflow gap analysis spreadsheet I've been using to track progress on that particular part of the project. You can see different sections of the documentation. Red means it hasn't been filled in at all, yellow if there's progress in some documentation, light green if it's fully drafted and in review. And this is sort of my attitude commensurate with the progress of this last semester. So you can see a big chunk, at the end of this, it just keeps going in a loop. You can see a big chunk is actually now done, and I'm moving into the second chunk this semester. It could actually go a little faster now too, now that I have a good foundation of the process, and our working group is a lot smaller, just me and 3 other people. So that's my biggest focus. We're moving along in our evaluation. I hope we can have some solid recommendations for a platform by the time I'm done with my residency. I'd like to formalize my workflow literature review. When we've submitted we have submitted a couple of conference proposals, and we're waiting to hear back about those. So I really feel like it's all coming together, and there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel, and I am excited to report back in May. That's all.